God bless everyone. Today, I will share the testimony of James Carter, a man who experienced a soul-shaking journey to the afterlife, uncovering shocking truths about his deepest sins and the frailty of humanity itself. James's harrowing encounter with terrifying, faceless figures and haunting visions from his past revealed the stark reality of his actions, forcing him to confront the path of Jesus in a way he never imagined. Now, I'm going to read James's letter exactly as he wrote it, so we can uncover the chilling truth of his sin and the reason he faced the unimaginable. Stay with me. You won't believe what he saw. My name is James Carter, and I'm 70 years old, living in a quiet corner of Mississippi. For much of my life, I walked a path paved with prejudice and indifference. I didn't see it that way back then, of course. To me, it was just the way things were. How I was raised, how my neighbors acted, how life seemed to flow around me. I never questioned the sneers, the dismissive glances, or the unspoken lines that divided people. I just went along with it, not realizing that every silent choice I made was shaping the person I had become. Looking back, I can see how my beliefs were shaped by the world around me. Casual ignorance was as much a part of my day as the morning paper or the hum of my tractor. It wasn't that I hated anyone outright. I told myself that much. But the truth is, I never cared enough to see beyond the color of a person's skin or the circumstances of their life. Empathy wasn't something I knew how to feel, let alone show. It was easier to look away, to shrug off the quiet voice in my heart that asked, "Why does it matter?" My world was small and comfortable, and I made sure it stayed that way. But comfort has a way of shattering when you least expect it. It was just another October morning when everything changed. I had no idea that a trip into town for tractor parts would set the wheels of fate into motion. The day seemed ordinary, the sky gray but calm, the roads quiet, a country song humming on the radio. I couldn't have known that a single moment at an empty intersection would unravel the life I thought I understood and plunge me into an experience that would force me to confront the truths I had buried for decades. Little did I know, my journey was just beginning. What happened next shook the very core of my being. It was supposed to be a routine drive home, just another ordinary day. I had finished running errands in town, picking up a few parts for my tractor, and tossed them onto the back seat of my truck. The air was crisp with the faint promise of autumn, and the roads were quiet, save for the soft hum of the country music playing on the radio. I remember how peaceful it felt. Just me, the open road, and the rhythmic clatter of my old engine. But in an instant, that calm was shattered. Out of the corner of my eye, I caught the blur of an old yellow Mustang roaring toward me, its engine growling like a caged beast. My foot barely touched the brake before the world erupted into chaos. The screech of tires cutting across asphalt was deafening, a sound so sharp it felt like it tore through my very soul. The Mustang smashed into my truck, metal folding against metal in a violent embrace. My body jolted hard to the right, and then the world turned upside down. I remember the sensation vividly, floating for a fraction of a second, as if gravity itself had taken a pause. But then, the harsh cold of the asphalt greeted me, stealing the breath from my lungs. Everything around me went silent, and a heavy, impenetrable darkness settled over my senses. The last thing I remember was the faint echo of that country melody fading into nothingness. When I opened my eyes, if you could even call it that, I wasn't in my truck anymore. I wasn't anywhere I could recognize. I was suspended in a vast, endless void where blinding flashes of white light pierced through the darkness, each accompanied by a deep, thunderous roar that rattled through my very core. It was as if time and space had unraveled, leaving me adrift in a place where nothing felt real, yet everything seemed crushingly heavy. I tried to move, to turn my head, to understand what was happening, but my body was frozen, paralyzed by an overwhelming force. This was no ordinary darkness. It was alive, pulsing with a strange energy that seemed to draw me deeper. And as those flashes began to reveal shadows and shapes swirling in the distance, I realized this was just the beginning of something far more terrifying than I could have ever imagined. I found myself pulled into a place that defied anything I had ever imagined. It wasn't walking, and it wasn't falling. I was being dragged. Cold, unyielding hands clutched at my arms and legs, their grip as relentless as iron. They didn't feel human. Their touch was damp and clammy, like the earth after a heavy rain. My body was limp, powerless against the force pulling me forward, and the only sound was their chilling chant, "Time to be cleaned." The words weren't spoken but echoed directly into my mind, a chorus of voices, men, women, young, old, intertwined in a haunting symphony. I tried to scream, to beg them to stop, but no sound escaped my lips. I was trapped in their grasp, hurtling towards something I couldn't comprehend. The world around me morphed into an endless, fiery underworld. The air was thick and suffocating, filled with a scorching heat that seemed to peel away my skin layer by layer. The ground beneath me was uneven, rough and scalding, like volcanic rock. Shadows danced against colossal pillars that stretched high into a crimson sky, their eerie flickers casting grotesque shapes across the walls of the cavernous expanse. Moans and cries echoed from every direction, close, distant, all around me. They weren't just noises. They were filled with despair so raw it pierced my soul. The stench of sulfur and decay filled my lungs, burning with every shallow breath I managed to take. It felt as though I had entered a place where every torment was eternal and escape was impossible. Amid the chaos, I began to make out figures, men in white hoods, standing perfectly still, their torches flickering against the fiery backdrop. The Ku Klux Klan. My chest tightened as their gaze bore into me, even though their faces were obscured. I recognized the symbols of hate, the silent condemnation in their posture. I wanted to turn away, but I couldn't. My eyes were drawn to them, and I felt the weight of their presence as if it were crushing me. It was then that I saw him, a figure standing apart from the rest. My childhood friend, Samuel. He wasn't in a hood, but his eyes were fixed on me with a piercing intensity. It was a look that shattered something deep inside me, unleashing a flood of memories I had buried for years. Images flashed before me, sharp and unrelenting. I saw Samuel as a boy, his quiet admiration for a toy truck I once held but never offered to share. I saw him as a young man, trudging through the dust with a sack on his back while I sat high on my tractor, watching but never helping. Each memory was a slap to my face, a mirror held up to the indifference I had carried through my life. Samuel's gaze didn't waver, and I felt a pit form in my stomach, a chasm of guilt and shame I had ignored for decades. His presence was a question I couldn't answer, a truth I couldn't deny. But before I could even think to speak, a new figure stepped forward, and what I saw next froze the blood in my veins. The horror I was about to witness would force me to confront the darkest corners of my soul. The deeper I was dragged into that hellish realm, the more unbearable it became. The air was thick, choking me with every breath. It carried a sulfuric stench so intense that it burned my nose and made my stomach churn. The heat was oppressive, searing my skin even without touching flames. The ground beneath me was jagged and scorching, like volcanic rock that radiated an unrelenting heat. Every step, or rather, every moment of being pulled forward, made me feel like I was being stripped raw, exposed to something far more punishing than fire. This wasn't just a place. It was alive, breathing its torment into every crack and crevice of my soul. As I was dragged further, I began to see figures in the distance. At first, they were shadowy and indistinct, but soon their faces came into view, and I recognized some of them. Among the shifting flames and glowing embers stood infamous figures from history, their presence amplifying the terror that gripped me. Adolf Hitler stood at the center of it all, his eyes dark and piercing as he berated a trembling man cowering before him. The man's pleas for mercy fell on deaf ears, and with a single gesture, two monstrous figures dragged him toward a massive stone slab. I could barely watch as one of the creatures raised a hammer and with a sickening crunch brought it down on the man's hands. His screams echoed in the cavernous expanse, cutting through me like a blade. Everywhere I looked, there were scenes of punishment, each more horrifying than the last. I saw people bound in chains, struggling against their restraints as flames licked at their skin. Others were submerged in boiling pits, their cries muffled by the bubbling liquid. The punishments were grotesque, but they weren't arbitrary. Each one seemed tailored to the sins of the individual, a reflection of the pain they had inflicted or the wrongs they had ignored. The horror wasn't just in witnessing their suffering, it was in the realization that this place mirrored my own guilt and shame. The flames that danced around me weren't just fire. They seemed to sear away the long-hidden truths I had buried deep within myself. As I stared at the scenes unfolding before me, I couldn't shake the feeling that this place wasn't just punishing me. It was revealing me. The flames illuminated the darkest corners of my soul, exposing every sin, every moment of indifference, every time I chose silence over action. The heat wasn't just external, it burned within me, forcing me to confront the ugliness I had refused to see. And yet, amidst the torment, I felt something else, a sense that this was only the beginning. The figures, the punishments, the suffocating heat, these were just the surface. Deeper truths, darker revelations were waiting for me. I could feel them calling, pulling me further into the abyss, and I knew I wasn't ready for what was coming next. I found myself in the center of it all, facing a vision so horrific and so personal that it brought me to my knees. There, in the flickering glow of the fiery underworld, stood a cross, and nailed to it was me. My arms were stretched wide, my hands and feet bound by nails that seemed to pierce not just flesh, but every part of my soul. The face staring back at me was unmistakably mine, yet it carried an expression I had never seen before. Raw, unfiltered guilt. Every detail was agonizingly clear, the blood dripping from my hands, the weight of the cross pressing down, and the unrelenting gaze of Samuel standing just a few feet away. His eyes, dark and unwavering, cut through me more deeply than the nails ever could. Samuel stepped closer, his presence commanding and his voice steady. "Don't you think you deserve this?" he asked, his tone laced with a quiet yet piercing anger. The weight of his words settled over me like a shroud. He didn't need to shout. His mere presence demanded answers. Memories began flooding back, moments I had worked so hard to bury. I could see myself walking past people in need, pretending not to notice. I could hear the disdain in my own laughter when I dismissed someone who didn't look or live like me. My mind clung to a single refrain: "I'm not a bad person." I said it out loud, over and over, but the words felt heavier with each repetition, as if the weight of my own lies was dragging me further into the abyss. When I finally opened my eyes, the blinding light of the hospital room seemed almost merciful. My body ached, and I could feel the tug of tubes and wires keeping me tethered to life. But it wasn't the physical pain that overwhelmed me. It was the shame. Not the kind of shame that you can brush off or hide from others, but a deep, consuming shame that comes from truly seeing yourself for the first time. Every memory, every moment from that hellish realm was burned into my mind. But alongside the shame came something else, a flicker of purpose. I was alive, and I understood that this second chance wasn't something to squander. I had to face my past, no matter how painful it was, and try to make things right. The first step was the hardest. I stood outside Samuel's house, my knees trembling as I raised my hand to knock on the door. For years, I had avoided this moment, telling myself it wasn't necessary, that time would smooth over the wounds I had caused. But as my fist connected with the wood, I felt the weight of all those excuses crumble. When Samuel opened the door, our eyes met, and I saw the same quiet strength that had confronted me in the depths of that infernal realm. My voice cracked as I spoke his name, and for a moment, I couldn't find the words. But then, through the lump in my throat, I finally said it. "I'm sorry, Samuel." 2 simple words, yet they felt like the heaviest I had ever spoken. What happened next would change me forever. Every morning, I stand in front of the mirror and I face the man staring back at me. For years, I avoided this moment, avoiding the weight of my own reflection, but not anymore. Now, I start each day with a promise. Today, I will be better. It's not an easy promise to make, and some mornings the doubt creeps in, memories of who I was, the mistakes I made, and the people I hurt. But I don't turn away. I meet my own gaze, steady and unflinching, and remind myself that change is a process, not a single act. Every day is a chance to rebuild, to strip away the layers of indifference and prejudice that once defined me. With that resolve, I've begun to take action. It started small, offering a helping hand to someone struggling, a kind word to a stranger. But as the days passed, I felt my purpose grow stronger. I've stopped my tractor on dusty roads to offer rides to men like Samuel, men burdened by the weight of their own struggles. I've opened doors I once walked past without a second thought and listened to stories I might have ignored before. Each act of kindness feels like a brick in a new foundation, one built on empathy and understanding, instead of the hollow pride I once carried. The weight I felt in that infernal place hasn't disappeared, but it's lighter now. With every step I take, I feel myself moving closer to the man I want to be. And so, I carry a simple mantra with me, one that guides my actions and thoughts. God bless you all. It's not just something I say, it's something I feel in every part of my being. I whisper it in the mornings as I stare into the mirror, and I repeat it under my breath as I work the fields. I say it to strangers, to old friends, and even to those who doubt the change in me. It's a reminder of the journey I've taken and the path I still walk. But even as I say those words, I know my journey isn't over. There's more to do, more truths to confront, and a future I must embrace fully. What lies ahead is uncertain, but one thing is clear. I'm ready to face it, one step at a time. If this story moved you or gave you something to think about, I'd love to hear your thoughts. Please take a moment to like this video, share it with someone who might need to hear it, and don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more powerful stories and testimonies. Your support means the world, and I'd love to read your opinions in the comments below. Let's keep the conversation going. Together, we can inspire and uplift each other. Thank you, and God bless you all.